This is the Unrationed Podcast. My name is Evan Chasteen.
I'm Josh Aranda.
And I am Tony Albrecht.
And thank you for listening, first of all, to the Unrationed Podcast. We have an episode planned for you. And when I say planned, typically what I mean by that is I think of something to talk about without telling Tony and Josh. Although I mentioned a high level what we're going to be talking about today. So that'll be fun to get into. We start every episode with our wild moments from the week. And our wild moments are times when we feel primal. This is why that strategy, like getting our communication in line, will be nice. Because every time I try to describe wild moments, I think I use different words. So to me, a wild moment is a primal moment that makes me or reminds me that I'm wild. Typically involves being in the woods, but not always. So, Tony, let's start with you. What's your wild moment from the week?
Primal is a good word for describing wild moments. We are such civilized creatures that I tend to lose sight of the fact that I'm a monkey wearing pants, right? Like that very basic idea. And there are some good things too. There are a lot of really good things to where we are as a species, but that losing touch with that sense of our primal relationship to the world around us that does seem essential to what we're doing, right? It's really key to what we're doing. I did get out in the woods 2 mornings ago for a run. My favorite trails, 15 minutes from the house, and I haven't been out there much over the summer. I think only maybe once or twice to that particular trail. I was running in more civilized places over the summer, preparing for Colorado and whatnot. So got out there at 6 a.m. I was the only person running these trails through the forest. It really is my happy place where the mind starts to get quiet, and it's fall up here is so gorgeous. It's
Where's up here for people listening?
Ontario, north of Toronto. So it's like I live right at a place where it's like the northern temperate forest meets like the northern, like where things get really piney, you know. So it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen in the fall. But running through the forest, you've got all your little animal sounds, but then you hear the leaves falling in a way, like the leaves are falling in such numbers that it almost sounds like rain, as you're going through in the silence. And I don't know how many times I've heard that, in my life, and it's a nice reminder. So, and maybe one thing we introduce is that we make a wild sound. Then it's like, oh, yeah.
I don't like that.
You don't like that.
Well, I liked your wild sound. I don't like having to make a wild sound myself every time I do my wild sound.
That's part of the appeal for me, is getting you to make wild sounds, Evan.
Fair enough.
Josh.
Yeah, so I got out in the woods as well. Last week, I texted my brother just to see if he could go camping on Friday. So we did a dad and kids camping trip, which was really, really cool. So he and his daughter, and then me and my 2 sons all went camping in this place called Farish Campground. Like aspens were changing, so all the hills were like lit up like fire yellow. It was really cool. And then on Saturday morning, my brother brought some fishing poles. So we went fishing with the kids. So this was the first time with the boys. And my brother caught one. And then I was throwing the line in with Jack, and he caught a little crawdad, and he was like so excited about it. And so anyways, we right there at the campsite, we cooked both the fish and the crawdad. We boiled the crawdad and ate it. And so I was proud of Jack. He tried the fish and the crawdad, which was cool. Yeah, and we went on a pretty awesome hike too. They had these amazing like rock formations, and so just seeing my 2 boys like climb on rocks and just be obsessed with nature and just kind of disappear into a magic world was really special to see. I mean, I was right there with them. I was having a blast and felt like in a different world. So it's pretty neat. Me and my
Nothing
brother were like, this is a dude's camping trip. Like it was very like low key. Not that there's anything against a non-dude camping trip, but it was funny. Like our wives were like, did you bring that? Did you bring that? Like, we think we did. Yeah, we got that.
Yeah.
And everything went really, really great. I didn't change my kids. Like we all just slept in the same clothes because it was like 30 degrees out. So we did not really need to pack any additional clothing because we just stayed in the same stuff.
Yeah, it does change something. And there's nothing like eating food that you've worked for. I have to imagine that'll be a memory for Jack for a long time.
Yeah, I hope so.
We have 15 chickens in our backyard, and the leaves are starting to fall, so they're becoming more visible. There's kind of some tree cover over their coop and the area of the fence that they most of the time stay in, but they get out quite a bit. We had one on the front steps of our house the other day, and the kids were so excited. And there's this hawk that's flying around, and I think lives in one of the trees right above it. And we're just kind of waiting for this hawk to swoop down as they become more visible and less protected throughout the day. And waiting not in a sense of like we want this to happen, but we know this is just the reality of having chickens and wild animals wanting to eat those chickens, and wanting our chickens to free range and not be cooped up, quite literally. So we saw the hawk flying around yesterday in a really cool way. It's like circling and then went to the top of a tree right above them and then the top of a tree next to them. And watching something like a hawk took on kind of new meaning, like where that saying, I don't know when that saying became a saying, but there is just this presence that they carry as they sit at the very top of something to see everything around them as a predator. It shifted something watching this thing it sit in a predatory way on top of a tree. It was so calm and still. That was my wild moment. Okay. Yeah, there it is. I actually do a hawk whistle for my kids. I don't know if it'll show up on the microphone. I'll do it this way.
Is that what a hawk sounds like?
That's my version of what a hawk sounds like. I can't speak with confidence that that's exactly what a hawk sounds like, but the kids can't tell a difference.
Cool.
No, they
My
can.
wild sound was a fish sound.
All right, I missed it.
Yeah. Yeah, Tony's got it.
All right, I've got a passage from Rumi that I would like to kick us off today with. I have a translation pulled up. It's not the translation that I first read, which was one by Coleman Barks, but I couldn't find it online. But I'm going to read it, and then maybe instead of me prompting specifically what from this passage we talk about what stood out to us from the passage, and kind of go from there. Does that sound like an okay structure for this?
Sounds great.
Okay. This is about Joseph. This is a story Rumi tells about Joseph having a friend visiting. So after his brothers had thrown him in the well, he was sold into slavery and becomes the right hand to the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. So a kind-hearted friend arrived from the far horizons and became the guest of Joseph, the truthful one. For they had been friends since the time of childhood, leaning against the cushion of friendship together. The friend reminded him of the cruelty and envy of his brothers. He replied, "That was like a chain, but I was a lion. The lion is not dishonored by the chain, and I have no complaint about what is destined by God. Even if there is a chain on the lion's neck, he is still a prince over all the chain makers." The friend asked, "How were you as a result of the prison and the well?" And Joseph replied, "Like the moon in its cycle of waning and fading. Even if the new moon becomes folded up during its waning, does it not eventually become the full moon in the sky? That's the passage. Tony, Josh, do you have any thoughts? Have you heard of this passage before? Do you read Rumi? Are you interested in his writings? Maybe start there and then jump into what your thoughts are about this particular one.
When I was at a 10-day silent meditation retreat in the Indian Himalaya back in 2015, I met a lovely woman there, and we started talking while we were waiting for our room assignments on day one in line. Then we went into silence, and then we came out of silence. And when she said, like, how's it going? And then I said something like, I liked it better when we were all silent, which came off, it didn't come off the way I intended it, which was I really came to value the silence, and it came off as, I'm not interested in talking to you. That was not the message I intended to convey to this woman. But then we did have a conversation, and our first conversation was about Rumi's poetry, where her father is from Iran, and they would like read Rumi in the original Farsi. I was like, that's really cool. Would you like to be the mother of my children? And she said, let's pump the brakes on that a little bit, cowboy, but I'll consider it. It worked out though. It did. She's the mother of my children now. So that's that story. All that to say, I like Rumi a lot, Evan. I do. But I don't think I'd heard that passage.
Actually, Tony introduced me to Rumi. I think the essential Rumi.
Coleman Barks. Yeah. But yeah, that's really good stuff. How do you want to dig into that, Evan?
So yesterday morning, the moon in the morning was massive in the sky, and it's still dark in the mornings now. The sun here in Georgia, it doesn't come up until around 7:40 right now. We haven't hit that time change where it knocks back. And so the kids were up, it was dark outside, and they're still at this age at 1 and 2 where they're rarely alive and moving around. Well, they're always alive. They're rarely up and moving around when it's dark outside. So looking at the stars or the moon and stuff like that is an experience that they're just getting old enough to kind of get into. And we went outside and looked at the moon, and my son loves the moon. There's something crazy I feel like I'm in a Star Wars movie sometimes whenever it's really close to the horizon and it's just massive in the sky. It's like, oh yeah, I'm also in space floating around the sun. I'm not somewhere else and everything else is in space. But anytime I look at the moon, I'm reminded of this passage, particularly even if the new moon becomes folded up during its waning, does it not eventually become the full moon in the sky? And that passage also seems to encapsulate this crossing of a threshold, this journey of orientation, disorientation, reorientation. I think the moon as a symbol represents that journey really well because it is full and it wanes and it disappears and it becomes full again. And it does this rhythmically and seemingly without fighting that rhythm, just going through the rhythm and disappearing and becoming full and disappearing and becoming full. And Joseph in this passage really seems to be confident of that cycle, which is something that I would like to lean into as I become a man. He used the image of a lion being chained, but still a lion, which stands out to me. I don't think that stood out to me the first time I read this, particularly this time on the Wilds, on the Unrationed podcast. So those are the two things I'm like, it seems right up our alley for what we're doing. A lion in chains, but still a lion, and a moon that is fading to become full again.
Yeah, both those images stood out to me as well. And to a large degree, maybe all we're doing here with the wilds, when it comes down to it, is, and I haven't thought about it in these terms until listening to our conversation here, but maybe all we're doing is helping ourselves and others understand this cyclical nature of reality, that there are seasons, that we are constantly in motion, not in a linear way, which is, I feel like, how I was taught to see the world, right? That I am here and I am on my way to success or happiness. And it is a linear path where I'm going from point A to point B, and the goal is to do it as efficiently and as directly as possible, and recognizing that no, that within that, getting wherever it is we're going isn't actually a straight line from point A to point B. It's an endless collection of, every day is a cycle. So many experiences in our life are cycles, that our internal life is a series of cycles that yeah, like the moon, right? That we are, and made that line in the chain. Maybe that is a way of seeing ourselves when we allow ourselves to get stuck in linear thinking, like in that more dualistic, binary way of seeing the world, right? It's so easy to end up feeling stuck, or feeling overly confined, or getting to a certain place and feeling like you're like stuck on that trajectory. Let's say, like, how'd I get here? And what is this? Like, is this what I signed up for? That's powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, really. The things that came to mind, in addition to what you all were saying, was, well, one, I was thinking about like my relationship with Laura, my wife, and trying to think about the cycles that go into that, right? We have our newest kiddo coming up, and we have a lot of things going on, like, work wise, and different initiatives that we're both working on, like side projects. And it was a couple nights ago that I felt like she was getting my like leftovers in any given day. Like, so I wasn't coming with the fullness. And sometimes that's just like being focused on other things. That's, both of us working hard. But like that moment a couple nights ago is what's sticking out to me when you were reading that, and just saying, like, these things are cyclical, these things are seasons, and I can shorten seasons sometimes, if I acknowledge it, if I'm the one that just takes the chain off of the lion's neck. And there's some seasons that just have to run its course. I am not the one that holds the key to the chain. So those were the things that were kind of going through my mind, and that I need to realize when I'm the one that's doing the imprisonment, and I need to let go of when I have no control over it, but nonetheless embrace it.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Do you not have the key though? How do you not have the key? And I'm interested in your thoughts on going down that path.
I think there's been stuff like work-wise where I'm not the only one that has control. Like, there's other parties at play to come to decisions, or, so maybe I have part of the key, and yet there's something keeping us in a point in time that just, we need to let it run its course and then move forward. So maybe I do always have the key, or a portion of it. I don't know. I haven't thought through that fully yet.
No, that makes
Can you
sense.
help analyze it for me?
No, constraints are real. That
Yeah.
we do have real constraints on us in any given time. That's legit. Yeah.
And the implication that we do have the key means that we have complete control in a way, which I don't think is true. Like there are always factors and situations and circumstances that are outside of our control. And so this line, I'm going to read it again, is the lion is not dishonored by the chain, and I have no complaint about what is destined by God. So it's not even the goal isn't to get rid of the chain, to speak back to your linear thinking, Tony, which I think we so easily fall back into. It's like the lion's in the chain. Obviously, the lion's goal is to be out of the chain. But what I'm getting from this is the lion is accepting its lionness with or without the chain. Like it is accepting the circumstances. It's not dishonored by it.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that come to mind. One is from the prophet Khalil Gibran, where he's talking about freedom and says that you're not actually free until even your desire for freedom is a fetter, that keeps you chained, right? That you want to be truly free, you accept everything, including a potential chain, right? That's true freedom, is whatever's holding you, that there's just total acceptance. Not in a way that's shameful, right, to that point, but just in the sense that that acceptance is key to best finding the way to move forward. And it's where my question to Josh came from. Another Sufi mystic, Hafiz. I have a key tattooed on my forearm for the poem that dropping keys, which is like the small man builds cages for everyone he knows, while the sage who has to duck her head when the moon is low can be found dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. So that idea that for so many of the things that do hold us back, or when we feel, that idea of feeling stuck or feeling trapped in a situation, that often it is our thinking. It is that linear thinking that is holding us, right? So that the key is actually there. It's like it's just a matter of picking it up. And
that reminded me of a passage from the Bible. I don't remember where it's at, but the two disciples are prisoners, and instead of acting like, let's just call this a metaphor, an archetype. The archetype of a prisoner is not wanting to be there, like chained like the lion. And instead of acting like a prisoner, they'd act like they're free, which is to say they continued to go about themselves as if go about their way as if they were not in prison. So singing songs, worshiping. And at that moment was the time when the prison walls came down. So it's like this, to me, it's a beautiful metaphor of, even in prison, you're rowdy prisoners. I would like to hear you talk more on that in a minute too, because I imagine that has something to do with Rowdy Creative, but maybe not.
Yeah, and actually, I've never thought about this before, but what you're saying there reminds me of another story that is tattooed on my other forearm.
All right.
I've never made this connection, but it's a story about Thoreau spending a single night in prison, or in jail, I should say, in his small town in Massachusetts.
For not paying taxes.
Yeah, not paying a tax as a protest against slavery and the Mexican-American War. So this was like 1850 or so. Yeah, something like that. And the story goes that he's in there, and his friend and benefactor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, comes up, and Emerson was a much more practical man of the world. He said, "Henry, what are you doing in there?" Like through the bars of the window. And Thoreau says, "Waldo, the question is, what are you doing out there?" That idea that in an unjust society, the only place for a just man is in jail. That on civil disobedience, Thoreau's essay about that experience, he talks about how, and I think Thoreau actually, I love his, right? I mean, so much that I've got some of it tattooed on me, right? He seemed totally insufferable and just a really difficult person. But he writes in there about how in that jail cell he was actually free. Yeah, like he could do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to do anything else. My hunch is that he would have felt differently if he, had to spend more than like one day in a jail cell as just, I mean, almost like I don't know, like a Pyrrhic protest. But yeah, that idea is interesting.
I mean, it is the friend asking, how were you as a result of the prison and the well? It's like you were in prison, you were in the well, and expecting some sort of answer. Oh my gosh, it was hell. But instead, it was this freedom that I think we're talking about, and that it seems like we're working towards, or we're working out with our work, with what we're doing with Wilds and the Woods. Like Wild 32 puts constraints on our lives in a way that could be considered a chain. It's like, it's not a list of things that we, I guess it is a list of things that we are to do, but whether you're making a list of things that you're not to do or are to do, it's a chain of some sort. Like that is taking on the chains and constraints and accepting them and finding freedom within those things. Jocko's discipline equals freedom comes to mind.
Yeah, it's a great line. Well, yeah, because this is something in my work with creativity that comes up a lot, is that it seems we're taught to think of creativity as a lack of constraints, that it's actually about, you put constraints on creativity, you're going to squash creativity. And that is fundamentally false. That you take away constraints and the result is not going to be creativity, the result is chaos, right? And that's the situation we find ourselves in so many situations. Is, and I describe this as my 20s, frankly, is me not wanting constraints, and sort of rebelling in this really immature, destructive way, where I was an agent of chaos.
Well, then there's this, sorry, there's this balance too between chaos and order, where too many constraints is tyranny. And so it's like, that's what we're trying to work out, it seems, is this freedom in the order, or ability to navigate chaos properly without tyranny.
For sure. Yeah, which takes us toward the king archetype, right? And that, so the purpose, all right. I've really enjoyed thinking in more detail about the king archetype, and we had touched before we started recording on how I've been putting some mental cycles to our coaching framework, that we're developing, and this idea of the bringing out the king within. Not to say that the goal is to put somebody in a position of power over somebody else, but how do we go from, I think about this very personally, of being the agent of chaos who totally misunderstands discipline and constraints, to being someone who's able to intentionally, mindfully, and joyfully choose constraints, and create the conditions in a way that you are able to have some order in your life, and create the conditions where growth can occur, right? And that growth often involves more constraints, right? What constraint is there greater than fatherhood, right? That it's just, the moment you become a father, your heart is just tied to this other creature in a way that all of a sudden, I mean, a part of your heart is outside of your body, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? And there are no constraints like that one that I've run across, but it's also the greatest thing in the world, right? There's nothing better aside from ice cream.
Josh, what you got?
Yeah, it's pretty solid stuff. I think I bring my Gramps up a lot on this just because I find him to embody like everything that I want to embody in terms of just mature masculinity. And going back to the chain, they're in a phase right now where he's got a 200-acre ranch out in California. 25 of the acres have olive trees on it, and he's planted them over the last 30 years. And so he's at this phase where he can't take care of the orchard anymore. And they're trying to figure out what to do with it, who wants to run it, maintain it. Well, they've come up with this creative solution and like found some people to take some of the olive and resell them. So they're going to sell maybe 200 trees a year, replant them, kind of have just an ongoing little business from selling these olive trees. It's like really fascinating to watch him because these trees, this ranch has been his constraint, but also, huge thing for him. Like they don't do a lot of traveling because they have animals, they have these trees, they have to take care of things. It always needs to be watered, right? They're like significant constraints. And now like seeing him where some of that responsibility and that constraint is changing is a really like fascinating thing to observe. And he's someone that takes all constraints with an incredible amount of joy. Like the last 5 years of his life has been a really interesting thing, just how he navigates it with health issues, with the orchard, with all kinds of stuff. And so yeah, when Tony was sharing that stuff, he was the person that came to mind with constraints and embracing them in a beautiful way, in a joyful way. That's really inspiring.
Yeah, it's always nice to have somebody who embodies this attitude or way of being in our lives to look at and look after, which is unfortunately not so common for us to have. Josh, I think you're blessed to have your Gramps in your life to embody a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree. Very much so.
Any other thoughts on the lion, the moon, the chains, the friendship? The friendship really stood out to me as well this time reading through, or maybe the second time reading through during this podcast. But as a kind-hearted friend arrived from the far horizons and became the guest of Joseph. And that's a beautiful thing. I think friendship seems to be key, or community, or doing things alongside others seems to also be key to what we're doing with Wilds in the Woods. Wild 32 is not something you embark on alone, something you embark on alongside others. And sharing that journey, sharing in constraints, sharing in the joy of constraints, the freedom found there seems to be impactful and another key to what we're doing with all of this.
Yeah.
Rumi, I'm blanking on the name of Rumi's friend, but Rumi's writing, I believe, was largely aimed at that. Rumi's whole deal for decades was based on this one friendship.
Shams?
Shams, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's right. That, and again, it pushes back on our cultural conditioning, that rugged individualism, where we rely on ourselves to pull ourselves up, and we our family situations get more and more nuclearized, right? and fractured and individualistic, right? And yeah, it's,
Josh, I've spoken a lot. I have a thought, but you were about to say something. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you said, Evan, in terms of me being fortunate and blessed to have my Gramps. And I think those are some of the things that like compel me like in the near term, and that I think that truth that not everybody has a Gramps like I do, like sinks in more and more every single year. And I think is what inspires me to continue doing some of this work with you guys. And also you guys being the inspiration too. So like the excerpt about the friend, like it's really fascinating what fraternity, what a group of dudes focused on the same thing, trying to help each other be better, like how that can change how good of a husband I am, how good of a father I am, how good of a coworker I am, how good I am at like showing up for fitness on a daily basis. Like it's not, my high school Spanish teacher used to say it's not rocket surgery, because not like rocket science or brain surgery. And I always like that. It's pretty good. So it's not rocket surgery, like, but at the same time, it's hard work. But if we do the work, our kids and our kids' kids can have those examples in us, which I find to be a very compelling and exciting motivation.
Yeah. And then this friendship, as we were talking about it, I started to think of the chain again. And Tony, whenever you were mentioning our children being this constraint, that's beautiful. And it's like the heart on the outside of our body. I started thinking of friendship and then marriage, which we've chosen that route. And I play with my ring a lot. So I was having these thoughts and then playing with this, which could in a way represent a link in a chain. Like now I've got this metaphor, like I've chosen a chain. Like I've chosen this marriage, this union. And then I thought of the negative ways people like culturally have talked about this is as a ball and chain. It's like, oh, your old ball and chain. It's like, well, that seems like a beautiful metaphor now after reading this Rumi thing. It's like, yes, like the ball and chain is not a constraint to be broken free of. It's like the lion is still a lion even with the chain, and there's freedom to be found with the discipline that comes with that relationship.
It keeps me from floating out into the ether and disappearing into chaos.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's the same. I think we all share that sentiment. I do think it's possible to not have that for somebody who's not choosing that route in marriage, but it's very impactful for the three of us.
For sure.
Shall we dismount? Tony, do you have any other Rumi memorized that you want to say at the end of this podcast episode inspired by Rumi?
Me and God have become like two fat people in a tiny boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing.
Beautiful. Thank you for listening to the Unrationed podcast. If you'd like to join us for Wild 32, where do they go, Tony?
Oh, sorry. I was roaring like a lion. That was a lion's roar. But yes, if you were interested in joining us for a Wild 32 or learning more about Wilds in the Woods, wildsinthewoods.com.
There's blog, email list. We've got some exciting things in the works for 2023. If you'd like to be the first to hear about that, sign up for the email list. I don't know what the advantage to being first is other than you're showing your support as we launch something into the world. And if you're a man who's interested in navigating chaos well, the inevitable chaos that comes with life, I can confidently say I think you'd benefit from being on the email list and engaging with Wilds in the Woods in some way.
It's worth noting you wouldn't be first on the email list. There are 8 people on the email list already. So
that's not what I was implying. It was that they would be the first to know about things going on.
Yeah.
Along with, they could, whoever opened the email first. We're going way too far down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, look, just join the email list.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.